Okay, so we are going to start today Siman Tov Reish Mem Beis. It's a very short Siman. We're going to do it in pretty quickly because it's so short. The tour begins a Siman by talking about the order of the night of Sukkes. Seder Hayoim Arvis Nechnosim Lebeis Akneses V'Koydin Kriyat Shema B'Birchoseha V'Choismin U'Parois Mispalim Shalosh Rishonis Shalosh Achronis Kiddush Yom Be'emsa Tabar Chartana V'Titei Manu Hashem Elokeinu Moadim L'Simcha Chagim Uzmanim L'Sasun Es Yoim Chagus U'Koisas Zman Simcha Sein Ba V'Mikrei Kodesh Ihasi Einu Hashem Elokeinu. Right, so this is the Seder, this is the order of davening. Kaddish. Shabbos maskam kol Shabbos is yom menuach hazev yes yom chag zog hazev v'choisim mekadesh Shabbos yom bezmanim. Now the inside over here is that when Sukkes falls out on Shabbos, you nevertheless only conclude the bracha of mekadesh hashabbos, but then you add v'Yisrael v'hazmanim. And then you say Vayichulu on Shabbos night. When it's Sukkos, you say Birchas Magen Avos, Bidvaroi. You say all that, V'choisim, and you conclude, this is the insight, B'shel Shabbos Lavad. You just conclude with the Shabbos just by itself. Umekade Shliach Sibor, the Chazan makes Kiddush v'neftardalim b'ateyim l'shalom v'oichlim v'shoisim b'sukkah. And then everyone goes to their house in peace, and they eat and they drink in the sukkah. So this is the whole order over here. There's no base. There's like literally there's no base Yosef. He just says Pashru. This whole thing is obvious. The Bach is minimal. There's really nothing going on. We're gonna go straight to the Mishna Berura. Like I said, we're just gonna run through this. And this, what we're doing today, is one of the around 700 Simanim in Orach Chaim. So this is another one down. So it's a good day. We got accomplished. The Shulchan Aruch writes. If the first day of Sukkos falls out on Shabbos, you say in Ma'ariv Bracha Mein Sheva, which we just discussed. That's Magen Avos, and you just conclude with mentioning Shabbos. The Mishna Berura says Marvis Belel Rishon. You don't say Ma'aravis on the first night of Sukkot. What is this? This was, as the Oz V'Hadar Mishna Berura explains over here, this was a piyut that they would add on the davening. They would add at the end of davening on Marv at the end of every single bracha of Shema, rather. So on the first night, you don't say this because not everyone is regular to say this, and they need to look into it a lot more. So now there's a concern over here. What's gonna happen? Why don't you say it? Since everyone's not regular with it, it's just something that comes up a couple times a year. There's a concern that they're gonna come to take the candles to look into it. In other words, what's gonna happen? They're gonna focus more on the words, something that you do every single day. So you're not gonna focus as much on the on looking at the words because you really know it already. But something which you're unfamiliar with, you might look at it more, and then there's a concern that you might come to adjust the candles, which obviously is prohibited, and that's going to be a major halachic issue over here. So that's the concern. You're going to try to increase it. Now, if it wasn't Shabbos, you wouldn't have this problem if it was only Yontif. However, because it's Shabbos, so then you're putting yourself in the situation is difficult. All right. Now, even though from the Ramah in the halachas of Shabbos in Siman Reish Ayin Hey, there's only a concern for an individual if they're using candles to read from. However, if it's a few people, it's not going to be a problem because if someone's going to come to tilt it, his friend will remind him not to tilt it. Nevertheless, with two svarim, with two different books that they're reading from or Siddurim, that will be prohibited even with two people. So therefore, that's why it would be a problem over here. The Taz says that this specifically applies to if we're getting our light from oil, it's prohibited. However, if it's a candle that's made out of wax, so then there wouldn't be a concern. However, the Mishna Berura over there quotes many others who says that even though that they allow wax, nevertheless, with the peutim in the shul and everything, that will be prohibited because in the shul there's a concern that you still might come to mess with it, and so therefore there would be an issue over there. That's according to the Mishna Berura over there. The Mishna Berura over here continues and says, "Balel sheni omer ma'arav shel yom rishon." On the second night, you say the ma'aravis of the first night. Okay, that's for obviously those who have the custom to do this. Most people don't, as we will see momentarily. That's why we never heard of this. V'hu adin kishachal shvi shel Pesach Shabbos. Same halacha applies when the seventh day of Pesach falls out on Shabbos. Oimrim b'motzei Shabbos. You say after Shabbos. Hamaravis hashayich liyom hashvi. You say after Shabbos the Hamaravis, which applies to the seventh day. V'hu adin of Pesach. V'hu adin b'simchas Torah. The same applies to Simchas Torah. Hamaravis shel Shmini Atzeres. You say the Hamaravis of Shmini Atzeres Levad, except for Lel Rishon v'Sheni shel Pesach, except for the first night and the second night of Pesach. She'omer b'Lel Sheni hashayich l'Lel Sheni, where you would say on the second night that which applies to the second night, Mishum Bikor Lasira, because of the Sphira. Bikor Lasphira, Einam Bama Madlikin, you don't say Bama Madlikin. Okay, so what's this talking about over here? If it falls out the seventh day of Pesach on Shabbos, you wouldn't say on Yontif night these peutim, you would say on Motzei Shabbos on the eighth night of Pesach the Maravis, which applies to that day. Okay, then it said, except for that. Okay, now at the end of this Mishna Berura, he said what's highlighted in blue is except for on the first night and second night of Pesach that we say on the second night what applies to the second night because of Bikur Lasfira. What is Bikur Lasfira? That is the piyut that talks about Sfira and applies to this night more than other piyutim that they needed to say on the first night. Okay, so that's what that is. Okay, then the Mishna Berura just says we do not say Bama Madlikin on Chol Hamoed or on during Pesach, it seems like, right? During Sukkos, rather. We're in Hilchos Sukkah.
Well, actual Yontiv night, right? We skip L'chadodi, we just go straight Mizvot
Correct.
Shabbos, right?
Correct. And there's a Gezerah, the Mishna Berura says, on the Bama Madlikin. That's what Ashkenazim do. Sephardim start from before L'chadodi.
They
A little
the
bit
whole
before.
thing?
Not the whole thing, but they start from just like,
First two, last two?
I think they do L'chadodi. Pretty sure they sing it. Not sure. Okay. Gezerah Mishum Yom Tov Shechal Be'er Shabbos Shein Momrim Bo Asartim. There's a concern that Yontif might fall out on Erev Shabbos when you can't say, did you tithe? Did you give the Meiser? Shein Meiser Yom Tov. You can't give Meiser on Yontif. L'chein ein oimrim Meiser afilu k'shchal Yom Tov b'Shabbos atma. There it is. Therefore, you don't say it even when Yontif falls out on Shabbos itself. So if Yontif falls out on Shabbos, on Sukkos, you would not say Bama Madlikin.
I think Meiser considered like Okal Nefesh.
It's Misakin. It's a problem.
Well, Misakin Mana.
Yeah, it's fixing. Yeah, it's an issue.
Okay.
Good question. No, Bays. Next Mishna Berura and last Mishna Berura. Shaloniskin el b'avur Shabbos. This was only established because of Shabbos Bilvad alone. But Torah calls it ba'avra mikra kodesh. The Torah says you say ba'avra mikra a kodesh. Hold on a minute. Okay, so let's continue over here. Okay, so the end of this Mishna Berura says that it was only established because of Shabbos alone. But Torah Kosav ba'ava mikra kodesh. Torah says you say ba'ava mikra kodesh u'minhagim shalom kosav ve'inoim ba'ava. Okay, and with our customs, apparently you don't say ba'ava. Okay, those are some technicalities regarding the texts of davening. Okay, no, we don't need to see this. So let's speak out something that, I mean, look, there's really, we're not going to drag this out. There's nothing to drag out over here. This is relatively straightforward. However, we should point out the Gershom Mishna Berura over here points out in the first footnote that the Vilna Gaon is quoted in the Meiser of Os Kuf Samach Beis. Also, the custom in Israel is not to say these piyutim at all. The Kaf HaChaim in Hilchos Yiras Omer, Siman Taf Peites Os Aleph, all the way in the beginning, says that also the custom among these Sephardim is not to say these peutim at all. So very few people are saying them. That's why we never heard of this over here. That's basically all you got to know about this, is that we don't do it. So other than that, and the insight of there's no Bama Madlikin on when Yontif falls out on Shabbos. That's all we're learning from the Siman. That's it. Okay, so we're gonna stop the Siman here. Any questions, comments on any of this? I don't know if they're okay.
Mhm.
No?
No.
This is straightforward stuff. It says that the Torah is Divrei Torah Aniyim b'makom echad, Ashir b'makom acher. Some places b'makom acher. Some places the Torah, so to say, is poor, meaning like this. There's not much going on. Other places it's wealthy. There's a lot going on. There's a lot involved. So stop here.